welcome back to another episode of Coventry Confidential. As I laid out a year ago, one of the main reasons for doing this podcast is try to demystify how town government in Coventry functions. And right now, the big issue in town government coming up on March 31st is a town hall meeting at 7 o'clock. Don't know exactly where the location is. It's probably at the high school in one of the auditoriums. There is a town hall meeting regarding a new gun ordinance that was just put into place. And there's going to be a vote regarding that. Just to cut through a lot of things and really go over the process of how this came about and what exactly is this gun ordinance really about, I have Dudley Brand, who was on the commission. And you've actually been on a lot of commissions. Thank you for coming on, Dudley. I know you were on the library commission. You're a longtime Coventry resident. I wanted to really get down to the facts on this and how this was created and what the gun ordinance really covers. And because there is a lot of disinformation out there, but I really wanted to just stick with how did you guys come to this? How are other towns like this? And what really are the limitations and sort of the logic behind this new gun ordinance and how what the state actually is lacking. It's one thing we've had in conversations with a few people is like for deep blue Connecticut, and you seem to, be able to, you can't do anything without getting, a license for it, that actually some laws there's nothing on the books at times when you would think they would be, especially when it comes to somebody having a gun range on their own property. So thank you for coming on, Dudley. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Okay.
It's a nice sunny day.
Yeah, a little chilly. I think I got to start the fire. I was surprised to see snow on the ground. Can you give me sort of like your credits regarding when it comes to gun ownership?
My interest started when I was a teenager. Hunting was a popular item, and I didn't grow up in a family that hunted, so I had to pursue this on my own, and I did it through what was required at the time was you had to get an NRA certificate, which was a pretty basic firearms safety course, and it never went more than an hour and a half, and sometimes it was pretty much a personal interview, and you got your card, and then you could get a license, and then I was able to pursue my hunting interest. I had to learn on my own. I didn't have anyone to pass down the tradition to me. So when I became a little older, I had firearms experience through the military. And through most of my life, I've been involved in owning and shooting firearms, target shooting, hunting. Later in life, I became a certified instructor for the state of Connecticut for conservation education and firearms safety. They call the program CEFS, and it's a prerequisite to get a hunting license in Connecticut. So I've been certified doing that for 35 years and nearly as long as a certified bow hunting instructor for DEAP. And I also hold NRA handgun education credentials to be able to teach the class to get a pistol permit.
Do you have a range in your backyard?
No, I choose not to shoot on my property. I probably could get away with it. I don't have a large lot, but I have an open air museum next to my house for David Hayes artwork, and I just don't think my personal shooting and what goes on at that property are a good mix.
So with those credentials, how did you were selected for the board? Did you volunteer for the board? How did you end up on this ordinance board?
I was contacted by people on the town council at one time. Prior to setting up this committee, they were looking for subject matter expertise, so to speak, clarifying shooting and what's permissible. And they did set up a committee finally to look into this. And a lot of this stems from the police chief leaning on the town for some ordinance that would give him grounds to deal with responding to calls regarding firearms, whether it's a safe and proper shooting situation or whether, it leaves some to be desired. But Connecticut does not maintain any laws regarding target shooting. Connecticut is full of laws with hunting rules. And a lot of people confuse the two. They indicate as things that have been happening in the last year in town on Facebook sites. They say that we have a 500-foot rule. We already have regulations in place, but they're confusing hunting regulations with so-called shooting regulations that don't exist. So the police department was starting to spend a lot of time responding to complaints regarding firearms, and there's no real set regulations with distances from houses or buildings that contain domestic animals or shooting your flammables or shooting, keeping your projectile from leaving your property, which would be a backstop. There was nothing. And, the chief indicated that if there was something in place and there was a problem, they could deal with the problem instead of these repeat calls, and it ties up time where they could be better spent doing something else. And so the committee was formed, and out of the committee, they had somebody that represented a town board, zoning. They wanted two people they wanted a person from each of the firearms clubs in town. So my selection was, I'm involved with a club. So that's how I was selected. And then they had a few members at large. So we had a committee of 5.
And all the members on that committee are gun owners and have, training beyond maybe your average gun owner. Is that?
Everybody has a pistol permit. So with a pistol permit, that's the gold standard in Connecticut. So if you have the pistol permit, that allows you to buy long guns, ammunition, and handguns. You're not restricted to just buying a long gun.
And it wasn't decided because of political affiliations either. It was because of experience with weapons.
Most of us were unaffiliated voters.
Let's just clear this. Is there any 2A violations in this gun ordinance, or any way you guys looked at this, when you came about looking at the, making a decision regarding this?
Well, the Second Amendment is not violated here. The Second Amendment is about being able to buy a gun, possess a gun, purchase a gun, and maintain that gun within your dwelling. What you do with that gun is not part of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment doesn't allow you just to take that gun and walk into a bank per se, because it's the Second Amendment right to carry a gun. I mean, there are rules with what you can do with that firearm outside of your house, on your property, and throughout the state, the community. Our pistol permits are good for within the boundaries of Connecticut. And there aren't many states that have a reciprocal with us where we can just carry into other states. Long guns have different restrictions, but Second Amendment is we're not infringing on it in any way with this.
And then another thing regarding what the police chief was talking about and was hoping to have an ordinance that he'd be able to address. One thing I've heard is that it was a few number of people, but in conversations before recording, I find you guys were talking about, no, this is a town-wide issue that, varies from, one visit from the police officers or a sit-down talk with neighbors about shooting to, the cops being called a few times.
This committee spent quite a bit of time with Chief Peterson going over the issues that they face. And he had case reports from over like 2 years, and he took out not all. We didn't get all of them, but we got a broad sampling, and geographically, these complaints are all over town. It's not
Mhm.
one area. It's in some places. The calls have been repeat calls and like that, but a lot of times when the police department went to look into a complaint, it was resolved after that. They seldom had to go back, but there were legitimate issues, and some people, since their initial visit with the police, had violated the law and lost their privilege to own and possess a firearm, and so that didn't require any more visitation from the police. But there was a variety of things, and these were all target shooting
Mhm.
instances. It didn't involve hunting.
Going the other way, when people say, "Oh, there's hunting rules out there, why don't we just follow that?" They don't touch it at all. But this ordinance also wouldn't infringe on any hunting rules either. Is that
The municipalities cannot control hunting. That's controlled by the state of Connecticut, and some towns have chosen to try to regulate hunting, and the state steps in, and they're the body that controls the rules and regulations and policies of hunting within Connecticut, and in some cases, the federal government.
is there a reason why the state just leaves target shooting on your property up to the towns? Not one size fits all doesn't really work.
Yeah,
Pretty
that's
much.
a major part of it because
Yeah,
you could be rural or you could be a real
yeah.
urban city, and
Hmm.
you know you have space requirements. So with a firearm, you do need space to shoot it correctly. And one of the issues that we were looking to address is that people that do target shoot be able to have a backstop that can adequately stop what they're shooting and keep the projectile from leaving their property. And that only makes sense because stray rounds do cause problems.
You never know what happens after a bullet leaves a gun. Basically.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's terminal. You can't turn it back. You can't change. Once the trigger's pulled, it's done deal. And there are state regulations that will address issues when there's property damage or injuries to humans or worse. The other thing that I really need to point out here is we have a neighboring town, and it's not the only town, that when they were faced with firearms issues, they chose to restrict firearms target shooting within their town boundaries completely. No shooting, period. There's still hunting in these towns because the town can't regulate that, but Manchester is one of them. And the people on this committee did not want to see Coventry go that direction. This is important that people know this because that would have been the easiest out for the town. That would have just like, let's eliminate shooting, we'll eliminate this property. So like the whole thing here was to make shooting safe, let the shooters be able to still shoot where it's safe, and give consideration to the neighbors that don't shoot.
Now,
Try to reach a balance.
I also heard like an ordinance is not a law, but you're telling me that Manchester and other towns could introduce an ordinance that just shuts down target practice, and then it's enforceable. This
Yeah,
ordinance is enforceable, even though it only has I guess from looking at it, cash penalty basically, but it has something. So, is there a difference between an ordinance and a law, or are we just talking?
well, you can be cited with an ordinance, and
Yeah.
usually it's a cash penalty, a fine.
Okay.
And in our case, it was $100. Um, with a law, it could be anywhere. Obviously, a violation is going to get you in court,
Hmm.
but some of them carry jail terms, possible potential jail time. And one of the things, like if a person, say, hypothetically were shooting in Manchester and they were cited for that, along with that, they could be cited for reckless endangerment. That's a serious offense.
You weren't starting from scratch. You weren't just making things up from thin air. You were looking at other towns and what has been done. And so I'm guessing Coventry is a little behind on this, on coming up with an ordinance from conversation. What other towns did you guys look at, and were you able to basically that had already really done the work for this? A similar? Are there similar ordinances like this in our neighboring towns?
Well, most of them, there aren't that many towns that regulate shooting, but the ones that had ordinances ended up, I would say, being more stringent and stricter than what we presented. And a town next to us had a similar issue about 10 years ago, Towland complaints. They came up with an ordinance, and primarily the key points with theirs would be distances and a backstop to be able to stop. And since they established their ordinance, they've never had to enforce it. They had a problem before that. They have an ordinance, and it's working for them. They don't have to put any resources into dealing with target shooting.
Mhm. Do you think that's what we just really need, is like to remove the vagueness of that this ordinance removes the vagueness of what I can do when it comes to target shooting in Coventry? I mean, was that or was that an approach of the board of just here's here's a structure, not limitations, but a structure we can all live with as neighbors?
Yeah, I mean, we looked at recommendations like from the NRA as to what would construe a proper shooting range, and their guidelines, and they have a book. It's about 2 inches thick, the range guide, and if you adhered to that, their recommendations for a personal range, it would be rather expensive to put in, and their backstop slash berm is quite large, and in most cases, 20 feet tall.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's
Yeah.
getting to the extremes, and
Yeah.
we weren't going to try to ask somebody to do that. The question came up. Well, what about size? Well, if you're a responsible person and you're shooting, you should be able to figure out what kind of material, how much material will keep your projectiles from leaving your property. And there's many ways of achieving a backstop, and in some, the fortunate people would have like a sandbank or an earthen bank to shoot into. So I mean, they have an ideal situation, and it's done with little to no cost. To build a backstop, it's going to require some work, maybe in some cases machinery and material that's going to, you know, contain all that.
Going back to the creation of the commission, don't you usually have a goal to either decide if there's an issue first, and then figure out a way, you know, because you guys could have met and said, well, we don't have everything's fine in Coventry, right? You could have gone that way, or that we need an ordinance that can be even stricter than what was, voted into law. How just to get a sense of the discussions you guys had to get to this point that we're at right now. Where did you come from, and how did you get there?
Well, meeting with the chief of police,
Yep.
he's the guy that has to deal with this stuff, and he deemed that there are issues, and perhaps having some rules and guidelines to follow that we would not have to keep the same thing going. It's you know, you create a set of guidelines. People see that, okay, I should be this distance, and I should have this backstop, and you adhere to that, and things should be fine. You're going to make some noise. Regulating noise and sound, we looked into that, and there isn't a town or city in the state of Connecticut that has a legitimate noise ordinance because it's so hard to effectively measure sound. It changes by the moment, and you have to have certified people, certified equipment. Um, you have to document all the weather conditions, the terrain, and what could be happening now with a sound test could change in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's really, if somebody ended up in court on a noise complaint, you'd need some marker as to where it was in the scale of decibels. Was it excessive, and then the intensity of the noise, the duration, real. It's real technical, and probably a big cost associated with dealing with that. So if you went to a complaint, yeah, it's too loud. Well, what I say is loud. Somebody else will say it's not loud, but they measure it, they get a marker, and it's really difficult. So towns felt that you know they're up against the wall with that. Coventry went through this noise thing several years ago with the boats on the lake,
Hmm.
and what came out of that was the quiet time on Sunday.
In the committee that created the ordinance, there was some back and forth and basically and compromise to come up with the final draft that we have here. And then you had to go, and then the town council had to okay it too. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. What do you think of this final draft that will be voted on, in another week? I mean, as a gun owner, as somebody who's been through the process, it sees other towns, what they have done, the limitations they put on, or even the degrees of what they've gone to, and somebody with NRA training and other things. Oh, and that was, what do you think of this ordinance, and what do groups like the NRA or anybody else who stand up for gun rights think of this too? I guess that's two questions for you.
With the final draft or the ordinance language was adopted, it's workable. It'd been evaluated by the town attorney, it'd been evaluated by just casually by other attorneys. It's all workable as far as the Constitution, and um, I believe that CCDL, a gun rights advocate group in Connecticut, they don't have a problem with this because it it's a common sense approach to shooters and non-shooters being able to coexist. Nobody's rights. They look at violation of rights. This is not affecting or impacting anybody's rights, and so you do have people that believe that this is okay. Um, I think it's not a bad thing. We in our final draft pretty much mirrored what Tolland is doing, with the exception with our distance. Our distance is a little less. They're 350 feet. We're 250, but our distance allowed neighbors, if they're in agreement, to sign off and reduce that distance down to whatever. So it's not a definitive distance. It can be altered. And I don't know if people understand that. It's in the language if you read the ordinance, but okay, if you get along fine with your neighbor and they don't mind you shooting for whatever, you know, 75 feet from their house or property line, they just sign a note and you have that and you're good to go.
Hmm.
But
So it does bring in the civility of neighbors, of being, just have a communication, start communicating first, and then it provides sort of a roadmap for people, who live next to each other, of how to engage with, you know, um, having a gun range on their property. Also, I was thinking one thing, I've asked is that it also seems to secure your investment in your house too. Having this ordinance, it provides sort of a safety, and also, I would think, do you think that it has that too? I mean, because Coventry's, people are paying a lot of money to live, to buy a house in this town,
Yeah.
and for most Americans, the biggest investment they ever make is their house. So does this ordinance in a way protect that investment? Just one more element of that, of protection?
I believe it would be, they're not creating a registry of shooting ranges, but
Mhm.
if I know that it's an area of concern when people are purchasing a house. I currently belong to more than one gun club, but I know that one of them in particular, okay, um, real estate agents make a point to let prospective buyers know that they're in a neighborhood where there are shooting ranges. Um, that could change a person's view on whether they want to purchase in that area. So it definitely has an impact. And, not everybody wants to move into a parcel that's abutting a gun range.
Mhm.
And it may not be, I think that the safety aspect is not the prime issue there. It's the sound and the noise. But, you know, I think it would impact the value of property. Would with a property that has peace and quiet be more beneficial than one that lives next to an interstate highway? We know that affects real estate. Nobody wants to listen to those trailer truck tires 24/7.
As people show up for the town hall meeting, is there any last things they should be aware of when it comes to this ordinance? And do you support the draft that's in front of them right now?
I do support it. This firearms ordinance is not too restrictive. I've heard at some of the public comment sessions that you get people to stand up. Well, the town's not going to tell me what I can do on my property. I'm going to do what I want when I want. Well, we're already living in a situation and have been for well over 100 years where the town does have a lot of say with what you can do with your property. You buy a lot, they tell you where you can put your driveway. They tell you where you can put your house. They tell you if you can put a swimming pool and where to put the swimming pool. They tell you where you can drill your well. They tell you where your septic's going to go. They tell you where your accessory dwellings, sheds, and they they do tell us and control a lot of what we can do with our so-called own property. This is not overreach. When I look at that, yeah, okay, the town can impact what I do with my property. So this is, to me, this is not more restrictive. I've maintained a federal firearms dealer's license for over 30 years. So, I kind of, you know, am at a different level than most people that own firearms. I maintain peace and quiet in my property. Um, I have neighbors that shoot around me. Uh, I have neighbors that are competitive shooters that shoot in early military, and that doesn't bother me. I have hunters all around me. They make noise, and then we have people with fireworks year round. So noise is noise.
Mhm.
But I'm one. I do respect my neighbors as far as me shooting. I'm not going to do anything that bothers my neighbors regarding that. So I can live with this. I mean, I thought it was the big thing that everybody on this committee wanted was to not eliminate a person's right to shoot. It just needs to be done safely. And shooting right up next to somebody's house, I wouldn't consider that safe. You can't hunt next to somebody's house.
Yeah.
The police department wouldn't have to use resources to keep dealing with some issues. It gives people a guideline even before they start.
Mhm.
It will tell them, what would be acceptable. Yeah, I have this distance. Okay, I can talk to my neighbor. Communication with your neighbor in a good way is paramount. And in a lot of areas in town, the people that shoot would never be affected.
Yeah. So
They
in a
can
way,
maintain status quo.
yeah, in a way, it's allows us to have safety, civility, protect our major investment in a house, and maybe not drain the bank account of the police department that we have, and save the town some money that way too. So, hey, Dudley, I have kept you on for over a half hour. I really appreciate you coming on and explaining the process and what this really is about, and the ordinance and what it does cover and what it does not take away. So I think, unless you had anything else to add, I think we're good.
Yes, I enjoyed speaking with you and answering questions. And um, um, with all this, I hope people get out and vote.
Mhm.
And having this ordinance established is not going to hurt our town in any way, shape, or form.
Good to know.
It's not going to really hurt. If it could affect somebody that's shooting in what I would consider an unsafe area. Coventry is unique with the way it's laid out, with the small properties around the lake that were large parcels cut up in 1937 into developments, and a lot of those lots are quarter acre with houses on them. So can you imagine, a bunch of quarter acre lots and people going out there shooting? It would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to do that safely.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, if a person does shoot around the lake, I I think that they would be facing some stiff violations of Connecticut statutes.
Mhm.
We looked at everything. We looked at what every other town in Connecticut was doing that had, and we didn't try to outdo them. We made something that works. We paralleled talent because it does work. Like I said, our distance is less, but theirs has been in place for 10 years and no problem. So it's not hurting anybody. They still shoot in talent. So there's proof that what we're doing is not over restrictive.
Gotcha. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
I really appreciate it. And
Take care.
I will see you around.